Finch, the first presidential debate occurred on September 10th. Not a lot on policy. It could be a lot on controversy, depending on if this report comes out is true. How do you see policy shaping around autonomous vehicles transportation? Because they didn't touch on it in the debate, and you have experience working for President Trump, so I'd like to get your perspective in a Harris administration and in a second Trump administration. How do you see AV policy and transportation policy in general coming to be?
Certainly, they didn't go into detail on AV policy. I remember watching the last time around, and I learned a lot more about golf handicaps than about any specific policies that are going to impact anybody I work with. A little lighter on that this time around. But I think we see, there's going to be different approaches depending on who wins. If it's President Trump, I know I've written before in publications that I think there's going to be a continuation of a focus on performance-based regulations, not focusing on specifics, but just looking at the outcomes and allowing innovators to make sure that the technology can perform at certain levels regarding safety. And that there will be rulemakings both from the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration on the trucking commercial motor vehicle side and from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration on the light duty vehicle or Robotaxi side. It'll be different for each one, but certainly with NHTSA, the vehicle regulators, there's going to have to be a step forward on the AV safety framework. Now, this was something that was proposed while I was at DOT under President Trump and Secretary Chow, and it's right. It may have even been a little premature back then, but I remember safety advocates were like, we're surprised at how progressive this is, at how proactive this is. But I think industry is interested in this because the ones that are out there that you're hearing about are already doing the right things. And so this essentially assures that there's not going to be somebody that is not being responsible coming in and wrecking it for everybody. So by NHTSA setting a performance-based standard around a safety framework, and there may be some sort of scenario or capability testing that goes along with it. We'll see. They have to be able to set up tests in ways that are both fair but randomized so that you can't game the test the way we've seen on emissions. But I think there's going to be a lot of progression there. And I think it's got to happen in these next 4 years, whether it's Trump or Harris. I think if it's Harris, then we're going to see really trying to make sure that they apply what the organized labor unions have been demanding, right? We've seen dozens and dozens of requests from organized labor that have a seat at the table, as they say in this administration. They've got people whose jobs it is in the administration is to make sure that what they're doing is labor friendly. I think the regulations that come forward will be ones that organized labor are far more comfortable with because they feel like they got to help craft them. Now, that being said, who's to say that Team Harris is going to be the same as Team Biden? There could be some turnover. There certainly seems like there's going to be some shifting of chairs, but we'll see. The last thing I'll say on this is I would suspect that if Harris wins, that we don't see a rush to the door to get out AV regulations because they may be deferential to the second term or Harris's first term. If it's Trump that wins, I think you're going to see a few things rushed out the door so that they can set the concrete and try and, establish the framework that then Team Trump would have to work from there, right? So set sort of the stage of debate, set the limitations of where they go, and then things would have to be adjusted instead of being able to set their approach fresh.
It's very clear, speaking with yourself and individuals who worked in President Trump's first term and individuals involved with the campaign and even President Trump's public remarks, he's going to be extremely pro-business. Vice President Harris could be, this is a could be because she doesn't give interviews. She's welcome to come on this podcast. I'd love to talk to her about AV policy, but she doesn't give interviews. Or they go on the All In podcast, but again, she doesn't give interviews.
To be fair, I don't think you actually invited her. You got to send that email.
You're pushing my buttons today. While you push my buttons, and then we're going to get into policy because I'm going to push some buttons here. Does everything change on October 1st if the longshoremen shut down the U.S. economy? I repeat, this is a threat to shut down the U.S. economy by shutting down 43% of the United States ports over automation and a 600% pay increase. Finch, I don't know about you, but I'd love a 600% pay increase. Not going to happen overnight. They want that. They want automation banned. They're holding the U.S. economy hostage. And I've seen some polling data, which maybe on the road to autonomy or autonomy markets will make public. The American public is overwhelmingly pro-automation. If they do that, does that weaken Harris's hand potentially as it relates to this type of policy? Because the American public is going to turn on the unions.
I don't see how it doesn't. The one thing I'll be interested in is whether or not they try to delay this until after the election. It certainly doesn't seem that way. It seems like they're holding strong with their demands because they see themselves in a position of leverage, the unions. So we'll see, because if they see it as damaging a president they've endorsed, then a candidate they've endorsed, then they may delay things a month or two to sort of give them a break. But, they can hold the current administration, they can use their position of leverage with them to try and get them to put pressure on businesses to sign off on the deals on their terms. So it's going to be an interesting three-way dance, I guess four-way dance if you think of candidate Harris, President Biden, and then labor and the ports themselves. It's going to be an interesting dance, but certainly it's brinksmanship on its own, like we're going to see in Congress as well with funding.
But let us not forget, Harris is part of the Biden administration. That's not talked about. She's a part of that. If the U.S. economy shuts down on October 1st, Vice President Harris takes some of that blame, and the American public is going to hold her accountable for playing politics. And playing politics, there's a bill. It passed in California, the California Safe and Secure Innovation for Frontier Artificial Intelligence Systems Act. I was in Silicon Valley this week, Finch, overwhelmingly meeting with founders of multi-billion-dollar companies employing thousands of individuals. The common denominator, Governor Newsom signs that bill, they leave. The governor has until September 30th to sign that bill. He seems like he's walking this tightrope, playing this brinksmanship, trying to appease the left, while also his aspirations, if Vice President Harris doesn't run in 4 years. I don't bet, but I'll make a prediction that Newsom's going to throw his hat in the ring, and he's playing this delicate balancing game, because if AI leaves California and goes to Texas, another interesting thing I learned when I was in Silicon Valley, Houston's emerging as a big AI hub. What happens and what implications will that have on the national level if Governor Newsom does sign that bill?
Yeah, well, I didn't realize that Houston was emerging as a hub. I'd always heard of all the investments in and around Austin, but I guess at some point it spreads to other key hubs in the state that also have favorable conditions. So I often look at what California is doing on AI as sort of shifting the Overton window, right? The window of where the debate is. So you have the U.S. federal approach, where there's been action from Republicans and Democrats. You have California, and then you have the EU. And that's sort of where everything comes together to shape the overall narrative of where we're going. I think the federal government's interesting because I was a part of a lot of the federal government activities around AI. Actually got to lead the White House's engagement and the multi-stakeholder engagement on AI, the federal White House negotiations with some of our fellow countries around the world on how we should manage the risks and benefits of AI. And, transportation is one of the first use cases that's tangible that people really see. So I got to help lead that summit and then worked with the White House Office of Science, Technology, Policy, and all these issues. So what I see from Team Biden, President Trump had a lot of engagement on these issues, but there's some things that are fundamentally the same. When people think about regulating AI, they think that they're regulating this new thing and that there needs to be new approaches taken. But then when you break down the actual actions that it takes to provide regulations, whether or not you want them to be permissive, it really comes down to what are the use cases, who's regulating them today, and what are the tools they're already using. So it's not something new and different. It's all of the risks and all of the benefits you have today amplified. So it becomes about privacy. It becomes about IP. It becomes about data ownership, data protection, data generation, copyright issues. These are all things that are old and that have come up again and again, but now they're getting more emphasized because, again, you can use some of these tools to amplify the threats to security and cybersecurity and the benefits for the sort of opportunities you can generate economically. So, California, we even saw former Speaker Pelosi having to jump in to be like, hey, let's take it easy here on some of the things California is looking to legislate. But certainly if you want to take a regulate and subsidize approach like the EU has done, you're going to get the sort of same results that the EU has had, which is paltry. They strangle their own companies in their infancy with the overregulation, then try and subsidize them to get them going, and they just never take off because you can't hit the commercial market with something that's been fundamentally kneecapped, because you're afraid of what the worst things can happen, and you don't take a truly risk-based approach, which I know now Europe's trying to do. You can just really cut off your industries before they can grow into something that can be beneficial for all. And ultimately what this means is that other countries like China, where they're not worried about privacy and any data that you generate is the country's data, they can just generate the raw materials and throw the manpower and throw the money to generate their systems. So it's not just that you miss out on opportunities, it's that now someone else's systems will be put on you. And so as the US looks at this, whether we're talking about California, whether or not we're talking about Europe, you have the Chinese top-down approach, you have the European regulate and subsidize approach. We do have to take our own American approach to where you allow the entrepreneurs who take the risk to be able to see the benefits. You can put risk-based safeguards on these things, but not get carried away by all the craze and the hype of what terrible things AI can do. We can use the tools we have to provide the assurances to the American people that their own privacy, that their own security will be protected while still enabling them to use the tools that have benefits, and the economy will benefit as well.
It's California. They do one thing better than anybody. They sure know how to kill jobs. Point blank. What's causing this overregulation mentality around AI? Because if I'm sitting here and I'm President Xi of China, I'm lobbying. It's illegal, but I'm lobbying for California and Governor Newsom to sign this bill because I'm playing chess. I'm going to do a Belt and Road type strategy tactics to dominate the world on AI as he's currently doing with autonomous vehicles. It just seems that politicians get so wrapped up. This is some, not all, get so wrapped up in believing their own hype and this ideological. And Charlie Munger talks a lot about this in his speeches that he gave before his passing, where individuals get so ingrained in ideological they can't remove themselves from the broader picture or the broader strategy. It seems like that's what's happening in California, that they're believing their own hype. Do they not understand that what they're doing is a pro-China bill? It's an anti-U.S. bill?
The way I look at this is the way it's been characterized for me that I think makes sense. Often with Republicans, you see a pull approach where they believe in the free market, and so they can set up safeguards and regulations where necessary, but ultimately the market will pull the technologies through, pull the regulations through, they will pull the business opportunities through, and the market will correct for things that need to be corrected outside of the safeguards, the legitimate federal role or state and local role that the government has, but so that there's a balance and there's sort of a regulatory humility. When you believe the push approach, that you need to push things through, to push policies, to push technologies, to push electrification through, then you have to own it because you're not trusting the market to make these things. And then you have to show that you're smarter than where things would happen otherwise. And you have to take ownership of that. And so you have to put yourself forth as the expert. And if you keep pretending these things, as the saying goes, be careful what you pretend to be, because eventually you no longer pretend. You have to push this through, and then suddenly you believe that, yes, you figured out the economy, you figured out the free market, and you can do better than it. So you have to push your way through because you're the savior of the impacts of what this technology can mean, and you thought through all the corners and solved all the problems. So you lose that regulatory humility, and you lose the approach that the market has to correct itself because you're making the government the key player in these actions. And I think that is a fundamental difference in how a left of center or right of center government approaches these issues, technology or otherwise.
Vice President Harris comes from San Francisco, started her political career in California. Could her administration, if she is elected president, use that California bill as a model for what she wants to do on a national level?
I think it shapes the window of debate of what is acceptable. Now, again, there's plenty of Democrats that have said California is going too far. So I actually do think that there's more of a balance there, right? And certainly President Biden has been very active on this. He's directed his agencies to take a look at all of their authorities, all of their impacts and everything, and the tools they have. That's kind of what we were doing under President Trump. So if Vice President Harris becomes president and takes that different approach, this certainly gives them an opportunity to say, hey, this has been considered. Why don't we do this? Or even, and this is actually a little bit out of scope of that specific bill, do you allow California to do their own things and then do not have the federal government preempt in areas where they do have preemptive authority? We see that as a strategy because California's economy is so big that you let them do their own thing, don't preempt them, and then so many of the other areas of the country are sort of required to hit that level, those regulations, just by a de facto standard that becomes a federal standard because California is dictating it as such. We see that in many areas.
So the Clean Air Act, we're seeing it with the failure in the EV mandate. Jim Mullen's working that with the Clean Air Coalition. So we're seeing that failure. I'm really worried that there's the old saying that you're jumping the gun for the AI regulation, because I could see a scenario where that starts to have massive ripple effects. What impact do you see that The California AI bill, we all know from autonomous vehicles, if the governor vetoes it, it's coming back next section. And it's going to keep coming back and keep coming back. And other states will follow California's lead, maybe even Colorado, and introduce a bill. What impact do you see that these potential AI bills having on the development and commercialization of autonomous vehicles?
If you have some of the requirements where, put it this way, some of the organized labor demands are that you require a human driver in every autonomous vehicle. Well, presumably, you have a human driver that's then trained and capable of taking over. They are on duty, so they're getting paid. And so you're destroying the economics and the value of automation, right? Now, I mean, there's still some benefits. You've seen this with Plus AI and some of the others talking about how they can use this to try and lessen the load on drivers and use this as a tool to improve safety. And much of the benefit of autonomous trucks is being able to run that truck nearly continuously. But ultimately, the goal is to destroy the business model. And if you destroy the business model here and the businesses are developed elsewhere, it's a matter of time before they're allowed to come in here and they end up dominating the market because we've banned our market. And you can't have it to where everywhere west of the Mississippi can't get access to certain things by autonomous trucks because you're banning them in California and some of the major ports. Who knows if Washington State or I guess Oregon would also take action and have a West Coast block. But we talked about this before. There's no guarantee that the opportunities will stay in the U.S., and we're lucky if they go to Mexico. It could go to South America, it could go elsewhere. We've seen in the past that cities, states, countries that embrace new technologies, we talked about this with ports, containerization, and the streamlining of the entire supply chain, entire cities, many of which are in China, but also Singapore, Dubai, even the Port of LA, by embracing new standards, new technologies, that's where the flow of commerce goes. And that's where all the secondary, tertiary benefits come for manufacturing and some of the other opportunities that come. If you block that, there's no guarantee that the jobs will go to Charleston or Savannah. They could just go elsewhere in the world. And we lose the opportunity to be the economic powerhouse of the future because we blocked some of these tools that use AI because we were afraid of what it could possibly do without understanding and taking the time to actually engage in the technology and its development. And so we kill it in its infancy and it goes elsewhere. So that's my main concern with some of the things California is considering, but we'll see. There's still plenty of time to pass regulations that make sense. I'm at least happy that California is moving forward with the trucking regulations that they were told to move forward with a decade ago in 2013. Some forward movements better than the complete silence we've seen, which is de facto ban, but we'll see how that ends up at the end of the day.
What do you think caused the trucking regulation to move forward now? Because Bernard Soriano from the California D, he was mum for years. You speak with him privately, mum. I mean, he's a true gentleman, mum. But what do you think caused it to move now? And I'm not saying this, I'm not alluding to this. I'm just asking a simple question before I get the emails. Was this all politics?
I think that some could argue that it made sense. I'm not sure I would have done it this way, to split light duty regulations from the commercial motor vehicle regulations because they're different use cases. Fine. But the action of taking no action, and so having a ban, was not what was ever intended. I think that so many automated vehicle and autonomous trucking companies were making such progress, they were finally forced to accept the reality that it's real and that it's coming. And, at some point, they have to follow the law that their own state legislature passed. So I think it's really the innovators, the entrepreneurs, and the technologists that were making the dreams a reality. They finally were able to bring this to bear and get themselves to be taken seriously by the regulators and give the regulators what they need to move forward in the face of opposition with organized labor. It's a chicken and the egg thing because it's tough to make it a reality when there's a de facto ban. But once it is a reality, they're forced to deal with you. And so not the way I would have done it, but I'm grateful that we're seeing progress now.
We're thankful. You use the word grateful, I'll use the word thankful. We're seeing progress, but then I'm going to put on my reality hat. California has a massive budget shortfall coming. If you were to take an Uber, Lyft, any rideshare in the state of California, you pay, not Uber, not Lyft, you pay a 33% commercial insurance tax. That's right, 33% on your ride. Is somebody in the budget office somewhere saying, oh, wait a second, we could tax this, and we could generate more revenue to fill in our budget shortfall? You think that's driving some of this?
I hope so. There's a lot of benefit to having successful businesses drive the economy. Every time they conduct business, you make money off of it. And so if you ban these businesses for no reason, you're banning lots of potential income. I'm not saying taxes are the best thing in the world. I'm just saying there are legitimate taxes. And if you generate more economic activity, that generates more revenue for the cities and the states. And that's revenue that can be put towards the public good and put towards actual things that benefit the people. Taxes are legitimate. Public services are legitimate. Enabling businesses to make you more money is a good thing. And I think people don't need to be scared of business as much as sometimes they are, and just assuming that all business is bad.
That's well said. If Governor Newsom continues to lean towards on the side of autonomy against labor, does this start to create a wedge in California where labor starts to lose their grip, since the governor says, no, I am erring on the side of the California economy. I'm doing what's right for the California economy. I'm not doing what's right for your special interests.
There's always a balance, right? And so it's going to be what sort of deals can be struck, because, as you know, there are many jobs that are created when you have more economic activity. So it could be that truck drivers are worried. No truck driver will be losing their job, obviously. We've seen all the statistics, but they also talk about truck drivers potentially gambling with warehouse workers' jobs, with manufacturing jobs, with the other organized or non-organized jobs that exist in California. And so you start looking at how many people are worried about their jobs. And I understand the worry. It's legitimate concerns, even though we've seen that they have no reason to worry. But they start putting at risk other people's jobs. And I think that's the balance where you can say 100 people are worried here, but it could impact 1,000 jobs over there. You're going to be more worried about the 1,000 jobs than the 100. That frankly makes sense. So I think that there's some of that math that once you start digging into the details and get past like, oh, this scary thing could take my job, you realize that's probably not the case. And then you look at all the other secondary impacts. That's where you start finding a path forward. But it takes being willing to dig into that level of detail and the studies and the economic analysis that we've seen.
The economic analysis is wonderful, but what happens as Waymo continues to scale throughout California and the American public says, this is wonderful. I was safely able to send my child to school. I was able to go to the grocery store because of the service this provided. Does the public then start to turn and put pressure on the government if they try and regulate this or slow this down because it's become such a crucial, integral part of their life?
I think so. I mean, people become far more comfortable with autonomous vehicles when they actually see and experience them. And so as people start seeing the actual tangible benefits, then they start to want more of it. You've mentioned the price reductions in grocery stores many times, and wouldn't it be great if you could show that this item is cheaper for that? I'm sure you saw the article about parents putting their kids in autonomous vehicles, even though they're not supposed to, and letting them run them to different areas and feeling safer than they would if it was a rideshare or taxi. I think that there's a future for that. I mean, I've told the joke, even before I had kids, I was tired of taking them to soccer practice. That is something like 3:30 rolls around. If they need to go somewhere, am I supposed to just take off of work? This is something that can be a solution that makes sense, especially if you have systems that are geared towards this sort of operation so that the companies are fine with it, but that you can sort of keep tabs of your kids and, make sure it works. These are the sort of like commonsensical applications that I think people are comfortable with. I mean, I also intend to get old someday, and I want to have the ability to ride around in a autonomous vehicle so I can play whatever game I'm doing or talk on the phone, whatever, and not have to pay attention to driving. So, everybody gets old and everybody will be able to benefit from this. More and more as people touch and feel this technology, the more they'll demand more of it, and the less their fear will be about what this technology could be.
We all have a society. We all have one thing in common. We're all going out at some point, just a matter of how and when. I look at the economics around autonomous vehicles. I recently purchased a new vehicle, and you think about this. So one car family, there's no need for it because when you start to augment that we augmented with rideshare today, but if you think about that, you could augment that if you're taking the kids to soccer practice, to baseball, to surfing or golf. You can have one car and you can put the kids in there to go to that. That changes the game from a household budget. So now you don't have 2 lease payments. You have 1 lease payment. You don't have 2 insurance payments. You look at the CPI data. Insurance is still highly inflationary. Think about you in Florida. You could save so much money. It'd be cheaper to ride in a Waymo everywhere you go than it would be to lease a car $300 a month and pay insurance. Think about the financial economic savings to a family. But as an industry, I talk about it all the time, but the industry doesn't talk about it. Why is it not discussed around the positive economic benefits of autonomy? What it's going to do for the household budgets that are still suffering under inflation? And we got reports today. The ECB, European Union, is in a recession. There is a 50-50 likelihood, I'll even give you a 60% likelihood that we're going to have a recession here in America. The question is, does the Fed have the cojones? Can Powell get the votes to go 50 basis points, or is he going to go 25? Because if he doesn't, he's going to have to go 75 somehow by the end of the year, or we're going into a hard landing into a recession. But why is the industry so focused on safety and not focused on the positive economic benefits technology will have on the household budget?
I think that some of this is because it becomes speculative. They don't have final prices on everything. As these operations grow and they put it out there, the pricing of the rides will be a critical component towards adoption. I mean, we saw Uber had to operate for a decade before they were able to turn a profit. And that's with the deep pockets that were funding them and the worldwide scale that they were deploying in. It may take that sort of patience to be able to get automated vehicles in the same place. I don't know. But I think because there's so many questions, and I like the work that Alan Kornheiser's doing over at Princeton, looking at these economics, he always includes it in all of his newsletters. And I think that's great because that's going to be the key driver of where and how. Because at some point, you got to start actually making, beyond revenue, you got to start making a profit. So that means you got to get all your costs under control. You got to figure out where it makes sense to emphasize your deployments. And you got to figure out how to get those vehicles to run as continuously as possible, even understanding that you're not going to be getting that many rides at 3 or 4 a.m. So there's a lot that's going to be felt through. And I think until you get real data on the ground in meaningful ways, it becomes speculation. And we've seen some of the reports, they just get ignored because so much of it is hypothetical. So I think that's what it is. We'll see more of that, and they'll be able to show that. And this could be somewhere where autonomous trucks lead the way because they're able to show that decrease in the delivery of goods in a way that is far more routine and far more understandable for the average person. So maybe that's where we start and we build from there.
We could start autonomous trucking. We're going to need a messaging and marketing campaign to truly show it. Oh gosh, remember the old commercials from Walmart where Sam Walton and they had the little yellow guy rolling back prices? We're talking about it today. We need things like that to the public to understand autonomous trucks are rolling back prices.
Instead of the little figure hitting the thing, it'll be like a little truck jumping in and driving the prices down.
Yeah, and you can make it a Pixar cartoon. Then the kids, Mommy, Daddy, I want to shop there because the Pixar cartoons live there. Okay, you can have Larry the Cable Guy. He's a good voice for kids. Have him do it. Staying on the Uber front, today it was announced that Uber and Waymo signed a new agreement. This time it's different. Waymo is going to operate exclusively on the Uber network in Atlanta, in Austin. What are your thoughts on that deal?
So obviously I'm not in depth on this, but I mean, it's interesting just looking at how Uber's playing the market from going from Uber ATG and really developing the vehicle itself and everything to obviously selling that off, taking a step back for a while from the market, except letting their investments flow, to now investing in multiple operators in there and then striking these business deals. So it's interesting from the role that Uber clearly sees a bright future in this technology, but trying to figure out the most profitable way to play it from their point of view. I think that's very interesting. And I think over time, we'll see how it plays out. Who knows? I have no idea. Maybe you do. If this is a 5-year agreement, 10 years, maybe it's in perpetuity. I doubt it. But you get the point. This could just be to get things off the ground and to get this deployed and this technology out into the real world as quickly as possible. There's probably a savvy move for somebody that knows all the details of it.
Yeah, I've said this many times and I'll say this again. Dara Khosrowshahi is the best executive in autonomy today. The gentleman is wheeling and dealing and creating a tremendous amount of shareholder value. Mr. Khosrowshahi, sir, you're welcome on here. Please keep doing what you're doing. You're building the future of autonomy. You're enabling the Uber platform to scale. The interesting tidbit that we found out in this, and we'll find out in the filing all the exact details, only in the Uber app. The Waymo app will not operate in Atlanta and Austin. That's fascinating. If that starts to scale to say 5 cities, 6 cities, 7 cities, 20 cities, what happens to Lyft?
That's an interesting question. Yeah. I'm not sure. I mean, certainly people will still be able to have their options, but doesn't Uber have 75% of the market and Lyft is something like 10% right now anyway? I think of them as equals, but then I saw the split and it's like Uber is just far more dominant in this space. So it'll be interesting. I mean, certainly if you're in Austin, you'll have a number of options. Is it Zoox is down there, Cruise is down there, Waymo is down there, and you look at that, you look at Las Vegas, you're thinking, are people deploying in these places because of CES and because of South by Southwest? They want to be part of these exciting tech showcases, so they choose these cities for their deployments because of all of the people from outside of those cities that come to them and then spread the good word back out in the rest of the country. I mean, we've heard people in San Francisco treating Waymos as tourist opportunities. Maybe there's a strategy that nobody's informed me on of going to Austin and Miami and now Atlanta, because this is where central hubs where people gather and then go back to the rest of the country and become evangelical about this technology. Certainly seems smart.
It's great. I said this for years, and it's a great tourist attraction. You go to San Francisco, you ride in a trolley car, you ride in a Waymo, and you export the technology, and you start to build public trust around it. I did really think with Walter Piecyk and myself on Autonomy Markets, we had this conversation between Uber and the various different platforms. So let's just say you and I are in Austin and hey, Finch, let's go get some great barbecue or Tex-Mex and we want to go out to dinner. What differentiates us from taking the Cruise vehicle versus the Zoox vehicle versus the Waymo vehicle when we're all going to hail it on the Uber app? Does it come down to experience? What do you think drives the public to say, wait, I'd rather wait 2 more minutes to get the Zoox vehicle versus the Waymo vehicle, what's available now? How do you see that working? Or is this all just going to work on the routing algorithm, and life's like a box of chocolates? You never know what you're going to get.
Yeah, I don't know how much customer loyalty will be built up unless there's one of those things where somebody's clearly better. There's a clear difference in user experience. I mean, certainly people have their preferences, and I bet that they'll be able to select them. But of course, it'll come down to, obviously, you're going to want to go to Salt Lake for your barbecue because that's the best barbecue in the area. And so it's going to be who can take you there. Is the price the same? And then do I have to wait 5 minutes for this one and 15 minutes for that one? So it's going to be a lot of the very tangible on the ground decisions. And then if it's about the same price, about the same time, I may choose one over the other. I guess I shouldn't use brand names, but I may decide to choose one over the other to get me there. But it's probably going to be the big dumb objects that'll make the decisions for the people on what's convenient and what's the cost.
Or it could be a game of The Price is Right. Bob Barker, come on down. You never know. You just don't know. Bob Barker was great on Price is Right, by the way. Gotta give him a shout out. And even though he's passed, he was great.
He's who I grew up with.
Oh yeah, he was the man. When does antitrust issues come into play between Uber? Because if it seems they could end up de facto cornering the market for autonomy.
Well, I mean, you know that I don't know the answer to this, so it'll be interesting. And certainly, as these opportunities develop over time, it'll depend on how dominant any one player becomes in the market, how aggressive the federal regulators are in this area, and really how the other players handle it. Right? If everybody ends up in their own niche, maybe it's not a big deal. But I think there's too many. One, I'm not an expert in this area, and two, there's still too many unresolved questions about how things play out over time. So maybe you know better than I do.
I'm not an antitrust lawyer, but I will find an antitrust lawyer, maybe somebody at your firm, to K&L Gates to come on, or another firm to have that conversation with an expert.
You can hire him by the hour. We can bring him on.
I'm not paying $5,000 an hour. I've been down that rodeo before.
Wish we made that. Wouldn't that be something?
See, you get your union raise 600%. See, I just advocated for Finch Fulton for the senior leadership at K&L Gates. Mr. Fulton here, he needs a significant pay raise. He's got to keep up with the port operators. On the platform side, then outside of the regulatory environment, outside of antitrust, does this shape up to be a battle between the Tesla platform and the Uber platform?
I mean, it depends. What is it? Is it October 8th now that we're expecting the Tesla unveiling? Is that right?
October 10th. October 10th at Warner Brothers. And so here's the big question, and I'm going to put on my Autonomy Markets hat here for a minute. Does David Zaslav, the CEO of Warner Brothers, show up and make this a whole experience? That's the big question we're waiting to see.
Yeah, we'll see. It'll be about a month from now, so we'll know more. We'll have to come back then and opine on it. I mean, Tesla's got to prove it, right? There's a lot of talk. I think everybody's waiting with great anticipation to see, can they actually do it. And they've been saying they've been on the cusp since 2016, but it's always been one update away, one box to check away. Sometimes they blame the regulators even when it doesn't make sense. So if they can pull it off, I mean, I know a lot of people love their technology. So if they can pull it off, it'll certainly be essentially a new player in the game, because they're not a player in the robotaxi world right now. They just talk like they will be soon. And then there'll be all sorts of questions about vehicle ownership, liability in case of a crash, and how does insurance get adjusted if I own a Tesla and then I want to make it into a ride sharing service. I think they're getting away from that model and have more dedicated robotaxi type things, but haven't seen the vehicle yet. So there's still a lot of wild speculation about what we're going to see and just how real is it, or is it going to be a concept vehicle that's also just one update away for the next few years? We'll see it. He sort of has to put up, because he's been doing a lot of talking. So I think there's a lot of skeptics that have rightfully started to be like, I'm not sure if this time it's real.
There are unverified photos on X of a yellow Tesla vehicle, highly camouflaged, driving around the Warner Brothers lot. The question is, it's on the smaller side. The question is, what's truly underneath all the camouflage? It looks like it has a box trunk on the back, which obviously we know they're not going to do. It's going to be very interesting. Tesla, though, I believe it's a matter, they will deliver robotaxi at some point. I'm not going to give a date. I think that's premature. I do believe that they will crack self-driving. I'm loving 12.5. It works extremely well in certain circumstances, and they will crack it. But the other thing that Tesla's not getting a lot of credit for, they're shifting the market towards personally owned autonomous vehicles. We're starting to hear a lot of chatter around personally owned AVs. What are your thoughts on the concept, the development, and the commercialization of personally owned autonomous vehicles from a regulatory standpoint? Obviously, there's no national framework. Do we need that in place for it to truly scale, or is there another form of regulation that we need to truly enable personally owned autonomous vehicles to scale when the technology is ready?
So I think that the AV safety framework would come into play if we're talking that this is a level 3 vehicle where you can hand off control, or if they do come up with an updated vehicle that doesn't have conventional controls, there would need to be some regulatory updates and the safety framework would come into play. But it's not like these things would be deployed without rules that exist. They still have to comply with all the Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards, and NHTSA can still take action anytime they deem necessary to either fine, enforce, do recalls, force them to do updates, or pull them off the road entirely. I mean, they have that ability if it is unsafe, if there is an unreasonable risk to safety. So that is all played out. I always get annoyed when people say, like, there's no rules. It's like, there's a ton of rules. It's just, you're envisioning something that's tailor-made for this instead of a lot of the safeguards that already exist. So it'll be interesting, and then how it's used is going to play out in an interesting way, whether it's level 3 and you can sort of flip back and forth between automation, or if it's level 4, maybe it still has conventional controls, but you are using it or you're letting others use it. It all sort of plays out in a different way.
The next step in the evolution of this is licensing. Neuro came out this week, and I met with them, and they publicly laid out a roadmap where they're going to license the Neuro stack. Neuro has an OEM deal. You heard it here first. There's an announcement coming in the next 45 to 60 days with an OEM partner. Elon Musk has been very public saying that he is going to license FSD. Is that legal in today's regulatory environment where you can license a stack, deploy it, or do we have to see another change in the law in order for that to scale and become a commercial business?
So without knowing any of the details, I don't know if this is going to be considered aftermarket equipage or if this is going to be sold into commerce fully integrated. Certainly, if you were to take, I don't even know who the partner would be, you can use the Neuro stack on a vehicle, and if it's otherwise compliant with the Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards and is not introducing an unreasonable risk to safety, and they may be asked by NHTSA to prove that, like, hey, show us why you think that you're safe, whether it's with a self-safety assessment or otherwise, then it should be legal based on what I know. I don't see why it wouldn't be. I mean, it's the same question that you have, why is Tesla allowed to deploy their technology now? Why is Waymo and Zoox allowed to deploy their technology now? And it's for this reason. So I don't know why a licensed stack would be any different.
What we do know, a lot of change is coming to the autonomous vehicle industry. Business models are going to change. Commercialization strategies are going to change. The profitability of this technology will get to profitability, but underlying it all is insurance and regulation in the regulatory environment. Finch, as we get closer to the election, buddy, you're coming back on as we have more clarity of where this is going and what the regulatory environment is going to look like over the next 4 years for autonomous vehicles and autonomous trucks. You're very fortunate to have experience both on the passenger car side and the truck side. I can't wait to have this conversation with you when we have some clarity of what the next administration is going to look like.
8 weeks. We're 8 weeks away. That's no time at all.
It's no time at all. And we're going to have you back in 10 weeks when we have clarity. So there we go. We put it on the calendar. For today, Finch, as we look to wrap up, what would you like our listeners and viewers to take away with them?
One way or the other, whether or not Harris wins or Trump wins, we need to see action on the regulations for autonomous trucks and autonomous vehicles to move forward. There's the thing that American innovators need most is certainty. They have certainty. They can unlock the capital. They can unlock the entrepreneurship. They can unlock the innovative mindset to meet those standards. But without that, they're feeling their way through the dark. And if we leave them in the dark for too long, you will have other companies that are not Americans that will take advantage. And if we're not careful, to use a common term, they'll eat us for lunch. So we got to get moving on this. We've done enough listening, done enough thinking. It's time to start putting things in writing and to move forward in the regulation of this technology.
We have to move forward for the benefit and the health of the U.S. economy. Certainty unlocks investment. Investment unlocks economic growth. Economic growth is good for every single member of the American public. The future is bright. The future is autonomous. The future is scaling businesses with certainty in a stable regulatory environment. Finch, thank you as always for coming on the road to autonomy.
Thanks for having me.